Mr. Rogers was one of my first teachers, but he said that you can't be a good student if you don't have a good teacher. So I think that our focal point and our resources should be focused or honed in on helping teachers become great teachers.
Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I am your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. Maybe you've been listening for a while, or this is your first episode. If you like what you hear, would you do us a favor by rating and reviewing us on iTunes? This is a fantastic way to tell us you enjoy what we are creating. Also, if you want more MTSS resources, sign up for our weekly newsletter using the link in our show notes, and check out our website for all the blogs and guides you would ever need about MTSS. Ensuring that all students have the support they need often requires new innovation and openness to changing the status quo within the classroom, school, or district. And MTSS actually thrives when the whole team collaborates on finding the best idea. But sometimes innovation can seem risky or a little anxiety inducing. So today on
Mm.
the podcast, I'm really excited to chat with one of those innovative educators, Jorge Valenzuela, who's an educator, coach, speaker, author, and so much more. And so welcome to the podcast, George.
Thank you so much for having me, Larissa. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I usually start with a fun question, but I want to just take the time to kind of get to know a little bit about your journey to being an entrepreneur in the sort of innovative education innovative space. I don't know which one comes first, but so tell us a little bit. How did you end up sort of in this lane in this topic?
So I got into the classroom and started out as a computer science and STEM teacher. And I did that for about 7 years back in 2003. Then I got my administrative license, and I realized in the internship that I don't want to be a principal anytime soon. I don't want to be an AP. I don't want to do cafeteria duty, bus duty, or referrals. So I stayed in the classroom. Then one day, someone from central office walked into my classroom and she saw me teach. And she was very impressed and she encouraged me to apply for the instructional leadership position for my content area, which is technology and engineering education. And I'll be honest, Larissa, I didn't have the confidence I do now. But I believe that when people like you and they see something in you that you don't see in yourself, they're going to help you. So she kept encouraging me for about 6 months. Finally, I applied, I interviewed, and I got the job. When I got into the job, I realized that sometimes from central office, we tell teachers to do things that we don't know how to do ourselves. And so I had no interest in being a transactional leader, someone who says, okay, well, here's the curriculum and here's the resources. Now figure it out. I wanted to really be a transformational leader, someone who has the knowledge and the skill sets, who can show all educators, whether administrators who support teachers or actual teachers, how to improve in their craft. And if there's something I don't know how to do myself, then I can find the right coach or the right resource, and I can learn alongside my colleagues. I also became a master teacher. I got into the PhD program, and I learned the science behind all of the practices that we were doing in our work. And now I co create with other educators systems for many topics pertaining to instructional innovation, which is why I do what I do now.
I mean, I love that you talked about sort of you wanted to help teachers do the things, but not just tell them to do it, but, like, go and
Right.
show them how to do it, and I
Mhm.
think that to me I mean, I think every teacher probably would resonate with this when you sit in a professional development and clearly the person talking does not know what it's like to be in their shoes or like
Right.
you're like, oh, but you haven't been in the classroom the last 10 years, you don't know actually how this, and I totally relate to that because as an instructional coach I often felt that of like I want to
Mhm.
provide the resources, but if I didn't myself use this tool it would, it's harder to like help the teachers. And so I love that you kind of talked about this, but I want to go back to the idea of
Mm.
innovative education.
Mhm.
And I want you to kind of maybe define that for our audience because I think it can be a lot of it can mean a lot of different things to people. What in your way, in your in your understanding, what would you how would you define that?
In my way, instructional innovation means creating new ways to design, deliver, or assess learning, including the use of technology. And one way that I do this in my work is through action research, where teaching teams in schools serve as both researchers and practitioners by visiting classrooms and collecting data about what we see, and then going back and having data debriefs, and then figuring out the best way to support teachers.
I love this topic because action research, I think, is a really underutilized I think a lot of teachers maybe do it, but they don't call it action research, right?
Yeah,
They
yeah, yeah,
they
yeah.
maybe take anecdotal data, but, like, having a really, like, structure to that,
Mhm.
methodology. I know that I did that sort of in my master's programs using action research to kind of refine some of my teaching practices, um, and I think that that's one of those things that yeah, teachers probably do it, like, we're collecting data all the time as a teacher, we just may not do it in a formal process. And I would say at Branching Minds, we are big fans of data, that's a lot of what we do, and we are also big fans of collaboration, and so,
Mm.
but I think that collaboration with educators can be tricky, and I mean, maybe you can speak to this about teachers that you worked with that maybe were hesitant to have you help them in their practice. How do you sort of ensure that maybe some of that, the excitement of the innovation doesn't sort of deter people away? How do you help people be open to that?
Well, one of the things that we need to understand is that building a culture has to be collaborative. And of course, leaders in a school or in a district, they need to set the tone for culture, but everyone in a building needs to do their fair share as well,
Mhm.
including young people. So a lot of times you hear leaders use two terms synonymously, culture and climate. But the thing is this, culture is behavior, is what we do. And climate is how things feel. For example, it feels warm, hot, or cold. So, culture is the behavior we see in our organizations. And one of the things that I do is I have a teaching team first things first, is make some shared agreements. Shared agreements is a way to have a conversation and get to know each other and empathize so that we know how we want to work together. And that's one way that we can begin addressing the behaviors that an organization deems as valuable for achieving the goals of the school or the district. And here's how we can start. Some of the agreements that I help teams make, of course, are their own agreements. But some that I bring are number one, everyone participates. And it doesn't mean that everyone speaks at every meeting, but it does mean that everyone pays attention to who's speaking. Two, speak from the heart. And I know that we got away from this in education, speaking how we feel, but it's important that we speak from the heart, but we're also open to feedback. And then three is to listen to understand, not to respond.
Mm.
And the final thing that I encourage people to do is to provide each other feedback. Of course, they have to agree to the feedback, shared agreements, but give feedback, not pushback. Whoever you push back on, whether verbally, physically, I know not physically in schools, but verbally, even if they're intimidated by our position, our status in the organization, they're going to push back behind our back and ruin all instructional innovation efforts, organizational culture, all the things that are important to really driving a school system or a school.
Wow. I mean, all of those I have, like, something to say about, like, a lot of that, but I think that really, if you think about all 4 of those things that you mentioned, it really means that you kinda have to come to that time or that, like, collaboration with a sense of humility in a way of, like, an
Mm,
openness to participate, an openness
trust.
to listen. I love that you said, listen or, like, listen to understand and not to respond. That was
Mhm.
one thing I remember working with my 8th graders on. like, and it's something that I often am guilty of, like, I'm thinking about formulating my response and not really fully listening to what is happening. I think I actually did it while you were talking because, I think it's sort of human nature. We sort of start from our own viewpoint and our own perspective. But I think that practice of listening to understand can be really powerful for a culture in a school, because if you don't have that sense of being understood, if people don't feel understood, they're not going to be open to feedback. They're not going to be open to hearing what someone else says because, like, well, you don't understand me, so you're not going to be able to um, provide feedback.
And it's like real life. Like I ask my wife, "Do you want some feedback?" And sometimes she'll say yes, and sometimes she's like, "No." So I believe that people need to agree to get feedback from each other,
Yeah.
and then they have to agree on how they're going to provide feedback.
Yeah.
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 So.
Well, and I think how you provide feedback is really important, and timing
Mhm,
of that, because there are times where it's like, I want feedback, but not in this moment.
mhm,
If it's like a highly emotionally charged situation, of maybe feedback later on would be helpful. And I think that can be helpful for administrators to understand,
yeah.
because I understand that teachers and administrators are in very kind of urgent situations a lot parts of their day, right? Answering crisis and doing things like that, but really trying to find that time that people can be open,
Mhm.
emotion, because I do think that because there's so much of teaching and there's so much of anybody's work that
Right.
can feel very emotional, or just because we're all human, so it's going to affect us in different ways, and anyone that says they're not is lying, like.
I agree. I agree. Yeah.
I also really, just appreciate that you'd have those agreements beforehand, because I think
Mhm.
sometimes we skip that step. We maybe talk about meeting norms and stuff like that, but I think working agreements, that's something our team does, and I think it's really helpful to understand how people receive feedback and what everybody's roles are and what does its time look like. If you define that proactively instead of reactively, can save you a lot of heartache, and that really sets a great tone for working together.
Yeah, we have to put the horse before the cart. A lot of times we put the cart before the horse, and what we want the horse to do is to eventually lead the cart or pull the cart effortlessly. And so building a cohesive team is the most important thing. I think it's the first thing. And it's the first thing that I focus on my long-term contracts. And when they co-create a set of norms and shared agreements, then what happens is they agree of how they're going to work together. And then they
Yeah.
work out the kinks of the things that they don't want to do or how they don't want to work together. And feedback, timely feedback is an important thing. And folks that are leading instructional innovation efforts and have to work with teachers, they have to provide their folks effective but personalized feedback. There are three types of teachers that I've seen in my work. And the first is the seasoned teacher who's doing a great job and she knows that she's doing a great job. Then you have a teacher that they think they're doing a good job, and they are most of the time, but they might need a nudge. They might need um, some feedback. And then there's folks that are completely struggling or are just new teachers. Folks that are leading instructional innovation efforts cannot give all these folks the same type of feedback. It's got to be personalized, it's got to be kind, specific, and helpful.
I like that, kind, specific, helpful. That kind of feedback, or that sort of, if you have that perception around
Mhm.
feedback, I think that can be really helpful. And I think this sort of leads into something else I wanted to ask about. You talk about those 3 different types of teachers, and I think those different types of teachers probably handle when, someone comes in and is like, "Oh, I wanna be innovative and I wanna do some new things." 'Cause I wanna talk about maybe a team that doesn't have those maybe normed agreements and trying to, like, get to
Mm,
those points of the normed agreements, because everyone's at, I think, a different continuum, right? You have those new teachers that maybe come in with new ideas, and then you have those veteran teachers that have their sort of tried and true ways or tools in their toolbox that they know will
mhm.
work, and innovation seems maybe like that's a lot of work. I'm I'm too close to retirement to try new things. And then, or just the people that maybe even uncertain in their own I think maybe the people in the middle who think they might be doing a good job, but maybe feel uncertainty about how they're doing.
Mhm.
And so someone who comes in and is like, let's have some innovation, that can kind of feel a little threatening. How do you think, how would an administrator kind of go about trying to bring all of those people together into kind of a collaborative team?
Well, I think that the first thing is we need to understand why people are in education and why they remain in our profession. So if you look at the Why Teach survey of 2015, Edweek Research has published this. They say that the top reason why people enter our profession is a tie between wanting to make a difference in the lives of youth, but also because they think that they're good at it. So the top reason for entering our profession is tied to confidence and self efficacy. People won't tell you that because they probably don't understand that about themselves. And the top reason why people stay in the profession is because they know that they're good at it. So, therefore, folks that are supporting teachers need to understand it's about building confidence and self efficacy. And it doesn't really matter how long you've been in the classroom, it matters how confident you are in your core foundational teaching, your
Mm,
core instruction. Some people call it tier one, some people call it the entire group message. And one of the things that I do is I have a simple framework that I coach teams on before we even get to instructional innovation. And that's just another model. But the first thing is a very simple framework that they can look at and they can adapt as needed. And so the first thing, which we already talked about, is building a cohesive team. Shared agreements is the first step. But then the second step is learning how to personalize feedback for our different folks, which we talked about that. But the third thing is for the team to outline for the entire school
mm,
what are the essential elements of core instruction. And in my data collections of over 18 years, I've seen that there's 5 building blocks that when folks have these down packed and they understand these 5 things, then they can build innovative teaching
mm,
on that foundation. So the very first thing is a standards aligned evidence based curriculum. Their lessons need to have student outcomes that are derived from some competencies, some standards, whether it's academic, whether it's SEL, essential life skills, whatever it is that we want young people to learn. We need some statements, broad
mhm.
statements about what those learning goals are. And then we need to unpack those into friendly student learning targets that we can implement on a daily basis. The second building block, I believe, is a promotion of literacy and numeracy across everyone's lessons. Now,
Mhm.
it doesn't mean that if I'm not an ELA or math teacher, I have to assess these things, but it does mean that I look for logical connections and implement those foundational skills into my own curriculum. 3 is using high yielding strategies. High yielding strategies are strategies that we know work in education because they're high yielding and they have a positive impact on engagement and achievement. And then, third thing is to be able to monitor daily, weekly, all the time student engagement and achievement. If you look at John Hattie's work, Visible Learning, he says that there's a strong correlation between engagement and achievement. Those who are engaged, who are motivated, they will have an easier time achievement. They'll be more inclined, but also school districts that do not factor engagement into a new instructional innovation initiative is doomed to fail.
Mhm.
And then the fifth thing that I believe should be part of our core teaching is to monitor our own impact on the learning. Teachers need to know how we're doing, and we should be getting insights from our students and from trusted colleagues.
Yeah. I think all of those things, I mean, like we're all about, at Bringy Minds, we're all about sort of the tier one, you have to have a solid foundation to be able to
Mhm.
provide those right interventions at tier two or tier three. Um, And something I was thinking about when you were talking about the confidence, building the confidence, or making, the people are more likely to innovate maybe when they feel confident in what they're
Right.
doing.
There you go.
And I was thinking about how, you know, even just like maybe the amount of teachers that are leaving the profession
Mhm.
also has to do with the amount of change that's happened, I think, in the last 5 years in education. And the more change that happens, the less confident you feel. Because I can think about the years that I struggled the most in the classroom were when there were big change, when Common Core curriculum came out and we had
Mhm.
new technology, and it was like a whole bunch of change in 1 year. And it made you feel less confident in what you were doing. And there was no sort of, as much as I loved the impact that I had on kids, that confidence was kind of like knocked down a little bit because I was unsure, or things were new and I didn't feel as confident in my work. And I kind of just wonder, this sort of just like this light bulb that went on my head. And I was like, I wonder if that has something to do with the amount of teachers that feel less confident in their career as teacher because of that amount of change. And so maybe that's a note to the administrators that are listening, just the idea that when you provide avenues for your teachers to feel confident in what they
Mhm.
do, can make a big difference in how they perceive their own, the self-efficacy in their work. Like I just think that
Right.
it's a big, it all kind of ties together, that if you don't feel confident in what you do, it's really hard for you to want to take risks or try something new, or even just take action, do those extra things to become better at your job.
Mhm.
Because if you're starting from like a shaky foundation. So we talked a lot about things that stand out in kind of the feedback and even just building some of that confidence. Are there any other factors that you think are really important to building culture of collaboration and team problem solving that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I think that educational protocols work really well. Think of it as being in your kitchen and you're making a brand new dish, let's say lasagna, and you've never made it before. Even if you have all the tools, all the resources, all the ingredients in your kitchen, but you don't have a recipe, you don't have a framework, you don't have a system for it, you're not going to get very far. And so I think that the leaders that are leading teams in these discussions and hopefully modeling instructional innovation practices, they need to have some protocols and they need to have a system. Whenever I go somewhere and I see that there is no system, it's just a top down approach. We have to do this. Now figure it out. I don't think it works very well. And that really contributes to teachers now not feeling confident. And I think it starts from the top, the superintendent's office and the cabinet. When they don't have systems and they don't have protocols, then that trickles down to principals. And then that becomes an issue for teachers. And I think our most precious resource in 2024 are good teachers.
Mm,
Mr. Rogers once said this, and Mr. Rogers was one of my first teachers, but he said that you can't be a good student if you don't have a good teacher. So I think that our focal point and our resources should be focused or honed in on helping teachers become great teachers. And I believe it starts with their foundational core teaching. And then from there, as they get better at that, then they can start to add other innovative teaching
mhm.
strategies like project based learning, like artificial intelligence integration, and things like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think you have a good point in the fact that when we allow teachers, when we provide the resources and support that allow teachers to do the job, right? To
Hmm.
teach and to implement those best practices and have that high quality instruction, it it's very empowering for them.
Hmm.
And I think that's the job of administrators, when you have those education protocols and the framework in place. And I would say, branching minds, the MTSS framework really helps provide that in different ways. I think that that can be really helpful to think of as an administrator. Is like, your job is to support the framework and to support the education
Right,
protocol so
right.
that teachers can do their job. And I think sometimes it's really helpful to think about, of like, there are things, yes, teachers can take care of and do some of that administrative work, but if they didn't have to do that, how much time and mental energy could that free them up to do what they need to do in the classroom? And so I think that you just I love that point of just how education protocol and the structure of a school system and district and even just school itself, can really help. Because I mean, I just think about it kind of starts even at the classroom level, right? If I
Mhm.
don't have the protocol for how to go to the bathroom or how to sharpen the
Right.
pencil or all those little
There you
things,
go. You got
that
it.
interrupts my entire day. And so that's kind of a micro example, for sort of the macro of a school district. But I
Mhm.
think that it's the same thing. In order to protect that instructional time.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
Instructional innovation is an ongoing iterative process that goes on forever. And if school leaders and teachers understand that, and we implement simple things like learning walks, instructional rounds, and look at teaching in real time and see how kids are responding to our teaching, then it'll help us identify the right strategies. And as we become more savvy at instructional innovation, how to create the right strategies and the right protocols based on the factors that we're trying to uplift in the classroom, then we'll get better over time and we'll become very confident. And then we'll have amazing teachers.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that because I think that you're right. Like it does happen, it
Yeah,
continues to happen. We
it
had a
doesn't
guest
happen right away. Yeah.
we had a guest on earlier this summer, and he talked a lot about he likes to think of it as evolution, not revolution, right? Like you're always
Mm,
evolving on an idea, and it's always like whatever's next 2.0 or 3.0, just
that's a
like
great
you're
point.
always sort
Yeah.
of iterating on whatever you're doing. And I think instead of sort of throwing out the idea and having something new, you're always
Mhm.
building on what you're already doing. And so or you're building or subtract. I always think subtracting too. Like that's the popular thing right now. It's like, what can we subtract?
I think we should subtract anything that isn't enhancing our curriculum, what we're teaching, and our instruction, how we're teaching it. Get
Yeah.
rid of that, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
Well, I this is a great conversation and I think is really helpful for the leaders that listen. I would love to have you share a little bit how people can find sort of your work and hear more about what you do. And if they can find you online or where they should go.
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on my social media at George Does PBL. That is JORGE Does PBL, and on my website at lifelonglearningdefined.com.
Yeah. Awesome. We'll share that in the show notes. And I know you've written some books, so I'll share any links that you need us to share. So but any last words that you would say to leaders who have those maybe educational innovators on their staff that maybe sort of are flying under the radar? What would you say to them?
If you have folks that are really passionate and they want to help kids instructionally, then what I would do is I would cultivate and hone that passion and those talents within whatever your system is and your frameworks and your protocols, and have them understand that they're part of the bigger team and that we have to work together. And if you don't do that, you're going to lose them. They'll either go somewhere where they can do the things that they know works for kids, or they go solo.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good word. Well, thank you so much for being here. This was a great a chat and yeah.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Branching Minds.